Today we're going to talk about if your avoidant ex will reach out to you after a breakup. Now, this is actually one of the most common questions that I get asked in my coaching practice, and the truth is we found that most exes who are avoidant will usually not reach out to an ex on their own accord because it usually triggers two things within them: a feeling of trauma and a feeling of vulnerability that they aren't comfortable dealing with. Of course, like all things, there's a bit more nuance to it. So we're going to dive in and talk about the following things. So by the end of the video, this is what you're going to have learned. You're going to learn why your avoidant ex probably won't be reaching out to you. You're going to learn why an avoidant ex usually doesn't want to be friends after a breakup, why the avoidant prefers loneliness over everything else, and if you do want to reach out to them, you need to understand the nostalgia window. So let's begin. Why your avoidant ex probably won't reach out to you. Well, first things first, let's make sure that we're operating under the same framework here with regards to describing an avoidant. Our official definition of an avoidant within the confines of ex-boyfriend recovery and ex-girlfriend recovery is an individual who values independence and autonomy over all else. So the result is usually they push people away or leave relationships when that individual threatens that independence. So when you're dating someone and that person is doing something that makes you feel like your independence is being threatened, that is textbook dismissive avoidant. Now, we're pretty confident when we say that most avoidants won't be reaching out to you very easily. So we actually first formed this hypothesis within the polls done within our private Facebook support group, specifically polls done around the no contact rule. So about a couple of years ago, I ran this poll in our private Facebook support group where I basically asked people, hey, for those of you who have completed a no contact rule, how many of your exes have reached out during it? And my natural assumption was because the no contact rule is sort of this foundational strategy where you're cutting off all conceivable communication with an ex after a breakup, and you're doing this anywhere between 21 and 45 days, the thinking obviously would be that most people that implement a no contact rule, it's going to really make their ex want to get them back or get back in contact with them more. So some of the bad raps that, for example, the no contact rule gets is most people who do not like the no contact rule view it as this manipulation strategy as a way to get your ex to contact you. Well, believe it or not, our research showed something completely different. According to the poll, 62% of exes who had the no contact rule implemented on them did not reach out. Why? Well, let's turn to more polls to hopefully explain this phenomenon. So in 2021, I conducted a poll where I asked participants which attachment style they thought their exes were and yielded the following results. Essentially, 70% of the participants admitted that they believe their ex is avoidant. So the stars are beginning to align here. Exes who are having the no contact rule done on them are predominantly avoidant, which means they aren't going to be reaching out to you on their own accord. This is actually one of the primary reasons that my team and I are actually so adamant about reaching out first post no contact, because we don't really expect many exes will reach out themselves. But here's another interesting factoid you might not know. An avoidant ex doesn't usually want to be friends. So to further add more nuance to the mindset of an avoidant, I'd like to actually really explore why avoidants usually don't want to be friends after a breakup. Yet, strangely, they can find themselves striking up an arm's length relationship with you after the breakup if you reach out and retain a connection with them. Weird, right? But psychologically, it makes sense if you understand what's going on underneath. And I'm going to let one of the best avoidant resources in the world take the over for this one. My favorite avoidant resource is a website called Free to Attach, and this is a quote taken directly from them that talks about this phenomenon. It's rare that an avoidant would want to be friends after a breakup, but occasional contact with exes with whom they have a good dynamic, usually this would mean interaction that is light and non-emotionally open, can retain a comforting relationship bond for them, a feeling of genuine connection and support, and much needed boost for the low ego without too much investment or the engulfment of overdependence in the present. So a couple of things I'd like to accentuate here. Number one is good dynamic equals light and non-emotional contacts or topics. So most of our clients don't have this type of dynamic with their exes because most of our clients, by their own admission, classify themselves as anxious. That usually means they can't help themselves but to bring the relationship up and become extremely emotional about it, which in the end just brings the ex right back into the trauma. And for the avoidant, the perfect relationship is one where they can retain their independence but still have some ego boost from the relationship, some confidence built from the relationship. They like the no strings attached approach.
Real quick, I want to say that if you're new to this YouTube channel or you're trying to figure out what you should be doing to get your ex back and you're trying to learn if you even have a chance in your specific circumstance, probably the smartest thing for you to do is actually stop by our website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com, or take our Ex Recovery Chances quiz that can be found at exboyfriendrecovery.com. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, taking that free quiz is super easy to do. All you have to simply do is look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. It will take you directly to the quiz where you can fill it out and get an easy answer on what you should be doing going forward and overall what your chances look like in your specific situation. All right, so let's get you back to the video.
Now, what's interesting about the avoidant, diving even deeper, is they can actually prefer loneliness. So my go-to when I started researching the avoidance, like I said, is freetoattach.com. Every time I open that website up, I'm actually blown away by how deep it goes into the psychology of attachment styles. So I highly recommend checking out freetoattach.com if you want like the very down and dirty version of understanding every nuance of avoidance. But when I was like trying to figure out what I was going to say for this video, something caught my eye on that website. It was the following quote. So subconsciously, space from someone rather than any complicated engagement is always preferred. Even if conflicted or regretting, they often would be rather lonely than admit they might be wrong. Stubbornness is another passive-aggressive expression that stems from fear of vulnerability and confronting difficult emotions, one's own or someone else's. So you can read this statement a lot of different ways. So clearly the owners of Free to Attach, whoever wrote it or created it, are relating the statement to stubbornness and how the avoidant doesn't like to be wrong, so would rather choose to be lonely and use space than face the confrontation. But I actually read it slightly different. If we hearken everything back to the avoidant's core wound of never wanting to lose their own independence, I think of it as them choosing to be alone over engaging in any conversation that could trigger that core wound or that irritates it. It could be possible that an avoidant is so shell-shocked and trained to not have conversations in general that they will never even entertain the idea. And usually this means that if you ever want to have a conversation with your avoidant ex, you're going to be the one that needs to be reaching out. And for that, you need to understand the nostalgia window. So what is this nostalgia window? Well, I actually first talked about this concept in a video I did called How to Make Avoidant Exes Miss You. And since this has turned into quite the quote fest, let's get back to the old faithful and free to attach. Avoidants are free to long for an ex once that person is unavailable out of the relationship, and typically out of contact, so they are untouched by the actual engagement and their deactivation systems aren't triggered. So what does this mean? Basically, as long as you, the avoidance ex, are out of a relationship and they feel like you've moved on from them, their longing can begin to kick in. They start having these feelings of nostalgia. Now, when does that start happening specifically? The problem is, it's such a unique question because technically it can happen at different times depending on how the avoidant gets triggered and how deep your relationship was with them. So generally speaking, the rule I would use is the longer and more intense the relationship you had with the avoidant ex, the longer it's going to take for that nostalgia to kick in. So I actually did a video with Coach Tyler where we talked about the stages of dismissive avoidance go through during no contact. And we talk a little bit about this concept of when an avoidant ex feels nostalgia. And he actually mentioned that it can sometimes take years before they can come back into the picture. This is why often you hear those stories of, I moved on, I was really happy, I got someone else, and all of a sudden my ex came back. Sometimes that's how long extreme cases can take. Of course, we've been having some good initial success with 45 days of space. In fact, one of the recommendations with the no contact rule that I've been thinking about updating is getting rid of the 21-day rule and the 30-day rule, because when I actually look at the data, I'm consistently seeing longer no contact rules yielding better results. Now, that's not always the case, and I think you need to take it on a case-by-case basis, but when I look at success stories, that's the consistent finding I'm seeing. Now, I think there are two reasons for this. Number one is most of our clients fall victim to failing the no contact rule for the first time. So naturally, the no contact or the amount of space they're giving their ex is going to be longer. Number two is that longer periods of no contact give exes more space for them to hit this nostalgia time period. So in the end, it usually boils down to discipline. Do you submit to fear? Fear of losing your ex forever, fear of them finding someone new, fear of the unknown? Or do you achieve discipline? Do you wait long enough to reach out? Are you actively trying to move in a direction so that you are outgrowing your ex and healing from the breakup? If you can do those things, then usually you'll yield a favorable response from your ex. If you can't do those things, well, you'll probably end up in the exact same spot you are in now. Confused, frustrated, angry, and scared.